everybody. Welcome to the Board of Directors of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City. Our meetings are public, and you're welcome to join us in person on Zoom or by watching from the City Council agendas page, Facebook, YouTube, and Salt Lake City TV. We hope that you will continue to join us whichever manner you feel more comfortable. We begin our meeting with comments to the board. I would like to remind you that written comments might be submitted to the RDA offices via mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114, or emailing us at council.comments@slcgov.com or by calling our 24-hour line 801-535-7654. Thank you for joining us today. Before we start, I want to remind everybody about our rules of decorum, which are in place to ensure our meetings move along well, and we help everybody feel comfortable. A copy of the full rules of decorum are available at the door, and staff will post the link on Zoom. As some of you might notice, we have switched from WebEx to Zoom. With this comes some few changes, some learning curve. If you would like to comment today, we are accepting comments in person and online on Zoom. Isaac Canedo from our staff will moderate our Zoom and will message you with any questions about your registration. Staff is handling many tasks, and so please limit messages to them about technical issues and minimal information updates. If you do need to speak with our staff, please select Isaac Canedo from the list of participants. Please only use the chat to chat for troubleshooting purposes or registration inquiries, and be sure to direct your messages to Isaac only. If you need to, please raise your hand, control to indicate that you need something from the host. And this is all instructions for Zoom. Taylor Hill and our staff will be calling the names of those that wish to comment. Our staff adds the names of people who are registered to speak or turn into the comment card in the same order that it was received. We'll call the names of people on Zoom and in person based on the order of registration. And I'm struggling here. Bear with me. If you are on Zoom, please unmute your mic when Taylor calls your name. We will now open our general comment period. Taylor, please start with our first comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like there is no one registered to speak to general comment.
This is fantastic. That's a great, I would love to see more people comment in this meeting. So invite your friends. We move now to item 1, general comments to the board. The RDA Board of Directors will receive public comments. I think that we just did that. We move to the public hearings, and there is none. The Redevelopment Agency business, there is none. The approval of the minutes, and I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the board approve the meeting minutes of February 14th, 2023.
Second.
There is a motion to approve the meetings by Board Member Dugan and a second by Board Member Mano. All in favor?
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Okay, that passes 7-0. 6-0. Thank you.
I think Councilmember Wharton's online.
Yeah, but Victoria isn't.
Oh, Victoria, sorry.
Yeah. So now we're moving to item 2, informational, housing and transit reinvestment zone creation follow-up. We'll have at the table Lauren Parisi and Kate Huert, RDA project manager and RDA senior project manager.
Thank you. We do have a quick presentation if we could pull that up. Awesome. All right, so I will dive right in. Can we flip to the first slide, please? So we are here today really to review housing and transit reinvestment zones, which is a type of project area, also referred to as HTRZs for short. And so we'll review the general purpose, how these project areas differ from community reinvestment areas or CRAs, and then provide a few updates regarding the HTRZ legislation that occurred earlier in this year, and also provide information regarding the RDA's HTRZ request that will be centered around the transit stop at 200 West and 900 South. So to begin, State Code includes two very specific objectives for HTRZs, including that the project area promotes a higher utilization of public transit through the general promotion of transit-oriented development, and also that the project area increases the availability of affordable housing. And through that, there are multiple benefits that should occur listed here on the screen, such as water conservation, improved air quality, investment in more public transit, et cetera. And then there are also specific requirements that the state has for these types of project areas, which are that at least 51% of the developable area must include residential uses. The density must be pretty high at 50 units per acre. 10% of the housing must be affordable at 80% of the area median income and below. And then there must be a reasonable percentage of units with more than one bedroom. So it specifically asks for those, that the project area promotes those things, or has those things rather. Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I appreciate that the legislature had some attorneys draw up their requirements because they use the word reasonable, which I imagine is not defined anywhere.
It is not.
So we don't actually know what that could look like. I mean, do we have an idea? My understanding is there hasn't really been an HTRZ done yet, or has there?
There have been. I think there have been at least 3 approved. Is that right, Kate?
There's been at least 3 applications submitted.
Mm-hmm.
And what did their reasonable percentage of more than one bedroom look like? Do you have any idea on that?
I believe at least one of them, the majority was 1 bedroom. I'm not sure on the others, but I can look into that. And
I'm just curious because I think if we're looking at this, I know that one of the goals for this board and that we've talked about is having that increased bedroom number.
Mm-hmm.
But then I don't want to get pushback from the state or developers are being like, this is unreasonable numbers, of housing units with more than 1 bedroom, and we can't make it pencil or whatever the developed talk is. So maybe if we could just get some examples of what that looks like, so
yeah,
we're kind of prepared for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. We will do that.
Mr. Chair, to add on to that question, are we as a board able to implement more specificity to what reasonable means for us above and beyond the state legislation?
We could do that. We are currently working on an application for that node around 2nd West and 9th South, which Kate will talk about. So if you have, some specificity that you want to add regarding this point, we can talk about that today.
yeah, we'll dive in a little bit more. And when I start talking about those numbers,
Okay.
yeah.
And sorry, one last question that doesn't have anything to do with anything, but where are those 3 applications that were approved located?
Sandy, Vineyard, and I'm not sure if the South Jordan one has been approved or not.
Approved, but yeah, we heard from the mayor and the council members that they had applied for it for sure.
Cool. Okay, thank you.
And when you say approved, that means approved by the state.
Yes, by the Governor's Office
Governor's
of
Office.
Economic Opportunity, they put together a
Right,
committee.
right.
Yes, yes.
And we have, those applications are public if the board is interested in looking at those. So, okay, next slide, please. So HTRZs have very specific eligible uses that you can use tax increment on listed here. So income targeted housing, public infrastructure, property acquisition, enhanced development, a horizontal and vertical development, and structured parking, and then admin costs incurred to implement the project area. And then they also have specific property tax increment participation rates, which can be up to 80%. Sales tax participation can be up to 15%. And again, they specify that we can use up to 1% of what's collected for admin costs. So those are kind of more specific things in the code, the state code. Next slide, please. So we thought it might be helpful to kind of do a quick comparison between housing and transit reinvestment zones and then the community reinvestment areas, which we're more familiar with. So in general, again, the HTRZs really promote those specific objectives of transit-oriented development and housing, affordable housing in particular. The project area boundaries of an HTRZ are centered around specific transit stops, and this is different from a CRA where the boundaries are kind of determined by the RDA where there's need versus where there's a transit stop. HTRZs kind of lend themselves to supporting areas where there's specific development being planned versus community reinvestment areas where we might not have specific development, but we have specific development goals. In terms of the review, the HTRZ is subject to the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity Committee review. And then with a CRA, as we're familiar with kind of on State Street, we have to negotiate with each taxing entity for their participation versus that one state committee with an HTRZ. And then finally, the participation rates kind of vary. With an HTRZ, you kind of can get up to that 80% approved by the board or the state committee, and then the participation rates in a CRA are really set by each individual taxing entity. So those are kind of how they vary, and in general, HTRZs are kind of more of a specific tool that we can utilize with specific objectives. So now I'll let Kate dive into the legislative updates.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Next slide, please. So what we see here, this is a list of some of the changes that occurred during the 2023 legislative session, which affected HTRZs. Nothing mind-boggling occurred. It was a pretty okay session when it comes to the HTRZ. They didn't change a lot that will affect Salt Lake City. Some other places in the state may feel differently about that, but not us. For us, we are going to be required for any applications submitted after the middle of May to include some maps that were not originally required. Additionally, the state tax commission will be allowed to give their thoughts on the application before it is approved in the future. This is something of note for the application we are working on right now. The law allows the parcels to be non-contiguous and to be triggered in phases, which you can see why the tax commission requested to have a say in management of the collection of that tax increment, because that will be quite time consuming for them, I would assume. I'd also amended some of the membership. Oh,
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So did you just say that this allows a project area to be non-contiguous?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what happens for the project area we're looking at, which is around the 900 South, 200 West track station, because it's in an opportunity zone, we draw a half-mile radius circle around that, and then we can pick up to 100 acres of land in that. So those parcels don't have to be connected to each other. It's just whatever is anticipated to develop.
I feel like I knew a lot about HTRZs, and that's the first I realized that. That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, so it's exciting and a lot of work for the tax commission, most likely, and the county. So let's see, some other changes. The Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity is going to be required to provide noticing to the taxing entities once they receive an application so that everyone knows what is occurring. And those are the big things. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what we have here, this is a map that shows where our current project areas are, and then you can see the yellow blobs are some of the potential future HTRZ locations that we've discussed. They don't all have to occur, but they are potential ones. The intermodal hub is one that does not count towards the limited 8 because it is a front runner station. The state has not limited how many of those can occur. I believe you're aware that the RDA is working on a master plan for that area, and those plans will be used to help create the application
Mr. Chair?
in the future.
Board Member Petro, who isn't able to be in this discussion due to another commitment, asked that I mention that she's interested in adding to this list North Temple, 18th West, or something like that.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
So just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, yeah, I had heard that today, so that's good to know, and I will make a note of that. We are looking at, we included on that list, you'll see the ballpark. I know there's been some pros and cons going out between different types of options for providing support for that area, so you'll see that there, but just showing you that list of potential locations at the moment.
Can I ask, Mr. Chair, can I ask another question? So if we were to choose one of these that is already overlapping a CRA, the reason to do that would be that we get greater participation on the parcels in the HTRZ than we have been able to negotiate with the county and the school board. Is that?
It depends. So for the ballpark, the ballpark itself and the parking lot are actually not included in the state seat project area. If we were to do a HTRZ in that area, we could collect from all the taxing entities for those 2 parcels, and then if other parcels were included, the taxing entities that are not participating in the State Street CRA could participate up to the 80% on those.
Could the taxing entities that are already participating in the State Street then participate up to 80% if they're currently only participating at 25%? Or does one take precedence?
If they're only participating at 25%, the total summation of both project areas could only total 80%.
That makes sense.
I think there's a trade-off of having an HTRZ where you already have a CRA, because it's not additional increment. So if that increment is already diverted to an RDA, it's not like creating an HTRZ creates more money, but it does enable participation at maybe a greater rate than otherwise negotiated.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Just quickly to emphasize what Board Member Mano mentioned and what Board Member Petro wanted. What is the process to make sure that we have that North Temple one in the works as part of as a possibility? I'm hoping that makes it to the next dreams.
Yeah, we really just kind of have a running list, and I think it's helpful once we get like specific developments, then we can really consider starting the application. So we'll definitely keep the North Temple area on the list and check up on how the progress is going with specific development plans.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On that, so correct me on the maximum number of HTRZs for the county. Is it at 8?
So for tracks, our S line and the track stations. For the county, it would be 8.
So there's
Yes.
there's 8 maximum, and it's first come, first serve on those, correct?
Yes.
And there's already been 3.
So Sandy and South Jordan count towards that, but Vineyard does not.
Oh, because Vineyard was a front runner station.
Well, Vineyard was in
Different
Utah
county.
County.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Right, so there's 6, and it's first come, first serve on that. When you submit your application, then it still has to go through the approval process, but that's the next one. So we just need to make sure that we know we have a hot priority list, and that's our decision on that one.
Yeah.
And then we get going through that. Okay, thanks.
Yes, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair, I think, yeah, along the lines of that, I think when I hear like, well, we'll wait to see what developments come along and then we'll apply for it, it makes me a little bit nervous because I don't know, when those will come. But maybe it's something that we have to proactively look for and maybe have proposals or things ready so that we can start, if the board decides that we want to go for the remainder, that we have things ready and the staff ready and everything ready to apply. Because I don't want to leave things to chance where we might just get one because we were just waiting for development. I know there's development going on, so maybe we need to be more proactive and be like, okay, so the things that we know, let's go for it. Board, are you okay with this and going for it?
So, yeah, yes.
But let's not wait 2 years. We need to kind of have it.
So one of the reasons that the 900 South 200 West location was selected first is because we were aware of the most development occurring in that area.
Okay.
There's about 40 acres within the circle that you're seeing on your screens of development that is in progress. And then there's about 40 acres that in our application we are also including, so a total of between 80 and 85 acres of land that we anticipate developing in the next 5 to 10 years. So we are taking a little bit of your proactive approach on this one. We're taking the known development and those areas that we anticipate are in the planning stages of applying for building permits and getting their ducks in a row to apply. And we're using that as our baseline for the upcoming application.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, how was that list narrowed? What process was taken to?
Yeah, last fall when we came to meet with you, we let you know that we were hoping to have a very equitable opportunity for all landowners and developers in the area to submit their plans to us so that we could include their parcels in the application. So last November, we sent out a survey postcard to property owners and within this circle and also within the 650 South Main Circle. We weren't sure which area we'd focus on. We didn't get a very good response.
So that postcard was sent to any property owner?
Except for people that appeared to be single-family homeowners that weren't developers. We didn't go.
Yeah, it was sent to commercial and multifamily zoned property owners.
Yes. Yep, we focused on them. So we didn't get a lot of response from them. We did have a few developers that have reached out to us, and a consultant for one of the developers has been contacting other developers that they're aware of in the area, and based on that information, we received development details for about 40 acres.
I guess I'm having a couple flags raised as to whether or not we actually got all of the, if we automatically removed anyone that appeared to not be interested in development, maybe, because there are some multifamily zones here on which single-family properties exist. So I'm wondering if we didn't, and where did we miss people?
We were hoping to not gentrify the single-family homes. That was a concern that we had. We didn't want to force the lower income homeowners in the circle to be forced out of their homes. So that was part of our approach.
Yeah, and I would add that we kind of did like a parcel by parcel review and just really tried to be intentional about, is this likely to develop? Does it have the correct zoning? And we sent out the mailing to a large number of property owners. I would say the majority in this circle. So I do think we did try to reach out to everyone, and our intent was to be equitable in doing so.
I think my concern with the whole HTRZ tool is that because we're choosing parcel by parcel, it feels like really easy for things to fall through the cracks. Parcels that may actually benefit from this, specifically if they're owned by smaller individuals or smaller developers that don't know about the tool or don't. So I'm feeling a little concerned that could, I know I'm not saying the effort was not made to do that. I guess I'm a little concerned that the result may not be that we actually caught everybody, especially if you're saying we did this process, we eliminated these ones that didn't seem like it was applicable, and then we sent a postcard out, no one responded. So then this one developer that had buddies that also had land came to us and told us what 40 acres to choose. I'm feeling a little concerned that it's like that one developer's network.
So in addition to those 40 acres that we received from them, we went through parcel by parcel and added an additional about 40 acres to that. So we have between 80 and 85 acres that we are currently intending on including in that application.
Can I respond real quick to that? I guess I can sort of see where you're coming from, Board Member Mano, but I actually feel almost completely opposite, in the sense that I think that going sort of parcel by parcel with the intent to not gentrify a community, that's exactly what we're trying to do, of saying, how is this going to fit within the community itself? And how are we looking at what the goal of the HTRZ is, what the goal of our development is, what the identity of the community is? Are we going out to single family homes? Are we reaching, like, I want to know more about that than, okay, these parcels can be developed and not. I think that there's an intent behind this more than I would say other project areas that I've been a part of in some ways, right? That it seems to me that there is a lot of intent going behind how, where, and why this is happening.
If I may jump in, I think it's important to note that HTRZs are a different animal than your traditional CRA. And what we mean by that is, as Lauren and Kate have said, the legislation itself is designed that when you submit your application, you submit what you anticipate to be developed, and you submit very specific pro formas. And so there's a balancing act between what you know today is going to be developed and what you can build your pro forma and your tax increment off of, versus what intention can you take as the next step of what we then also anticipate having a likelihood develop, so that you can identify those specific parcels within the project area. It's not like a CRA where you just kind of throw a lasso around 100 acres and then you work to develop it within that 100 acres. You have to be specific in what properties you try to identify, because whatever you identify is what you get to pull increment from, and whatever you pull increment from is what then has to develop in a way that meets the requirements of the statute. So when you're talking about the density for the area, when you're talking about the affordability, you can't just have it be a single family home that you hope at some point may develop into something that may or may not have density or affordability. You have to go with what you're making a reasonable assumption will develop. And so that's why, Councilmember Fowler, Director Fowler, when you said it's weird to think of non-contiguous parcels, that's almost exactly what you're doing, is you're going in and saying, these properties are the ones that give us the highest likelihood to accomplish our goals within this area. And then what staff is trying to do as part of this application is take it to that next level of what I think you're getting at, Director Mono, which is what are we also going to then have available to build out the community benefits that we want to see, not just within these projects, but maybe outside of them a little bit. And that's where we've tried to insert things like transit opportunities, infrastructure improvements, green space. So we're trying to balance how we set this application up, which is not a very good design process by the legislation, but how do we set this application process up to where we can meet the requirements, identify the properties, and have the ability to pull increment, but then balance that with what we put into those specific projects, and then also have available for other things that we know we want to do from an equity standpoint or from a larger community benefit standpoint. So we're really like one of the first to kind of try to break through the wall in this way. The legislation is designed entirely for, you have one project, you know exactly what you're getting built, here's the pro forma for it, and here's where the money's going. And as you know, our nature of looking at redevelopment is not just putting money in that one project, but how do we build it out equitably and improve the community?
I don't know if I want to say this on the record, but it's like the grandfather of the PIDs and TIDs in some ways, right? Of like knowing that you have a project and then the legislature has come in and found a tool for you to create that particular project, where what we're trying to do is use the tool for the benefit of what we have tried to do, I think, through, in my time being on the council, of developing consciously and intentionally and with the, like a purpose behind it, but still being able to use a tool to incentivize that type of development.
So, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
So Danny, so the tax increment can only come from those properties that we've earmarked, or that we've marked. Tax increment from the CRA in general, from the outside of those earmarks, we could still, if it's in the CRA zone, we get the tax increment from that. If we're going to also develop it so that it's developed as a whole package instead of just these parcels throughout, because you still want to connect all those parcels. And if it's not in the CRA zone, we then would just have to develop that without the tax increment benefit.
Correct. So it's intentional where you're pulling it from specific properties. You're then turning around and negotiating with those developers of, okay, what does your project warrant? What is the gap? What do we want our participation to be? Those are the specific development costs. And then the way we're setting up is then to also be able to have some of that money from those specific projects go to larger community benefits as well.
And if they don't meet the requirements of the HCRZ, the tax increment just null and void. They have to meet the requirements of the HCRZ.
To qualify to receive the tax increment, yes.
Okay.
And so I think it's important to note also that what we're talking about today is just the application process to set up the HTRZs. What will come to you as a board will be, first and foremost, an update to our tax increment reimbursement agreement policy, and that'll be specific to how we participate within HTRZs, and more specifically, how we make the case for what we want to participate in the specific projects and what we give developers. So that will be the next step, that you all as a board get to have that policy discussion of how do we want to then take that increment and put it into the projects, and what do we want to have available for public benefits. And then you also then have the annual budget approval for every HTRZ, just like you do with our funds now, and every project reimbursement agreement will come to you as well. So a lot of what you're saying, we have heard, we're anticipating that being part of the process, and what comes back to you for those policy discussions of what do we want to make available for other uses.
So maybe, Mr. Chair, my question, I'll ask a slightly different question. Does the state legislation have guardrails around how much or how little of the tax increment that's collected can or must be spent on public infrastructure versus private developments versus any of the above?
No.
Does it have guardrails on if we choose these ones to collect increment, but there's a project that we didn't know about in time to include in the thing, but it has all these public benefits that we want to support? Could it be spent on private developments in the same area, but not originally identified?
I would say there aren't guardrails. I'd say that's a big gray area, which I'm looking at Kimberly because I want to see her head explode as I say that. But no, Kate, Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong. The legislation calls out what the potential uses are, for how you use the tax increment from an HTRZ, but it's not specific on how much has to go to the developers.
Housing versus, not like a CRA where X% must be housing.
Correct.
And there's not something as specific as in the CRA, whatever, that if it's housing, it doesn't have to be in the area from which it was collected.
So there is a requirement that of the housing units, at the state level, they require that 10% of them be affordable at 80% AMI in our app,
Area.
within the developable area, correct, in the HTRZ.
But there's no citywide housing contribution in an HTRZ that's required of a CRA.
Chair, I have one more
Go
question.
ahead.
So, so I have not seen the Sandy or the South Jordan, all the vineyard proposals. Have you seen it, and do you know what their proposal is, like what they're going to spend the funds
Yes.
in? Okay, can you just,
So-
can you
so
give us like
for
a few,
vineyard,
like examples
yeah.
so that I can wrap myself
So,
around where are they spending the money, and like what did they propose?
Yeah, so for Vineyard, a lot of their costs are going from like mid-rise building to high-rise. So the cost difference between building more dense, that's a majority of where their funding is going. Sandy, they had a lot that went towards structured parking.
Is it correct to say that when I did a scan of it, it looked like they had one particular development that they,
Yes.
so Sandy even had one particular development that they were focusing on.
Correct.
Unlike here where it seems like the staff is casting a wider net, acknowledging that there's more than one development going on in this area. It seems like Sandy and Vineyard have made the policy choice to focus on one development.
Correct. Our vision is to take this tool that the state has created to improve the city in a neighborhood fashion.
And South Jordan, do you remember?
South Jordan, they are focusing more on a downtown area, inclusive of a ballpark.
Okay.
Sorry.
Too soon.
It has a lot of infrastructure.
Thanks for,
Board Member
thanks for,
Fowler.
Yes.
My mic was on. I apologize. So,
Thanks.
sorry, one last
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So again, kind of putting this in layman's terms,
Uh-huh.
what it seems to me is we're trying to use this tool, kind of like a CRA but with the guidelines that we have to do because the state said we had to do it.
Correct. And what makes it so hard is, well, not hard, but there's a lot of gray, and we have to set a cap. So what we are submitting to the state in the application, we are looking at highest and best uses of the land. So we've reviewed the zoning, and where we anticipate development will likely happen based on either the ownership or the parcel type or the current use. For those areas where we don't have specific plans in place, we went with the highest and best use so we could get the cap as high as possible on the amount of money that would be received.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Chair, I know that we're probably over time, I apologize. But, so for example, using this tool and on that list in the S line, I mean, right now today, there is 1, 2, 3 projects I can think of off the top of my head that are about anywhere between 3 and 6 blocks away from the S line. And so going to sort of Board Member Mano's issue is like, we could already right today identify those projects, say these could be within the HTRZ, we can start collecting tax increment off of them, and also create some requirements by including them in the HTRZ. Like, for example, having affordable housing in the Snellgrove property, if they were part of the HTRZ. And then we sort of use that tax increment. So again, sort of creating a CRA with the bounds that the state has put and kind of including what we already know is going to happen and trying to get some public benefit out of that. Is that an overview of layman's terms there?
Yep, and then you can go beyond the affordable housing. So if you wanted to tie your incentive and your participation to also having first floor commercial or affordable commercial space, or any other of the public benefits that we have, our sustainability measures.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, but just to reiterate, because I think it's a good point, we'll also be reviewing those things when the individual developments come in for their tax increment reimbursement requests. So we have a better idea of what can actually be done and what we could require.
Okay, thank you.
Just slide 3?
Yes.
We have 30 more to go. No.
The next slide just says next steps are submitting the application. You'll be reviewing an HTRZ tax increment reimbursement policy that's coming your way in the next couple of months. So you'll get a say there on what the baseline threshold is, and
that's it.
there you go. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the explanations. We are moving now to item number 3, a resolution regarding the bicycle collective loan. At the table will be Tracy Tran, RDA Senior Project Manager, and Danny Walls, RDA Director, if you didn't know.
Afternoon.
Hello.
Can I get the slides up for the bicycle collective item? Great. So good afternoon. So I'm back before you today, and we have before you today a request for modifications to approve loan terms for a loan to the Bicycle Collective to build the organization's 15,000 square foot headquarters at 901 South Gale Street. Oh, next slide, please. Again, this is just a quick overview of what I just described. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the location of the site, located on 900 South and just west of 300 West. Next slide. And just to provide some background information related to the site, in 2017, the RDA owned the property, and through an RFP, the RDA selected the Bicycle Collective to negotiate the development of the property. In 2018, the RDA board approved a land write-down for the property in exchange for public benefits. In May of 2022, the RDA board approved a $1.75 million loan to the Bicycle Collective to develop the improvements for the property. And they returned in October of 2022, in which the RDA board approved an increased loan amount due to increased construction costs, totaling a loan of $2.25 million. And also within that board meeting, you guys had approved a 6-month lock on the base interest rate. Next slide, please. So since the October board meeting, the property was conveyed to the Bicycle Collective, and they used fundraising dollars to begin construction in January as they worked towards closing on the RDA loan. While working on closing on the RDA loan, an opportunity for the new markets tax credits became available, and they received a commitment for tax credits in February. The new markets tax credits require that the Bicycle Collective leverage funds in order to receive the tax credit equity. And because of this, they are coming back and requesting a couple amendments to the loan terms. One is to disperse the funds in a lump sum at closing instead of through construction draws. And in addition, they are requesting to extend the lock in the base interest rate, which actually expires today. So this temporary extension would just ensure that there are no surprises when they close on the tax credits, which is anticipated to occur by May 2023, so within the next month.
Does this mean we need to take action today if they, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
I heard that today deadline.
And construction is anticipated to be completed by Q3 of 2023. So.
Board members, any questions? I
have a couple more slides.
Oh, so sorry.
Sorry. It'll be fast. Next slide, please. So just here's an update to just the proposed loan terms. So with the new markets tax credit, they would actually reduce their loan amount to up to just $1.4 million. The base interest rate, they are proposing to lock in at that 5.66% interest rate, and then they would qualify for 4 interest rate reductions. The term would remain the same along with a 20-year amortization. Also, as requested, with the new markets tax credit, they are asking that loan proceeds are all dispersed at closing, and the RDA would have a first position lien on the property. Next slide. So in the case, and also in the case that the new markets tax credits don't work out, the resolution is written in a way to account for whether tax credits are involved or not. So in case anything falls through, I think the resolution covers both scenarios. So in terms of the considerations, the addition of the new markets tax credits will provide about $1 million in equity for the project and will reduce the amount that they will need to loan for the RDA loan. That means they will also carry less debt, so it makes it less risky, and the RDA will have a lien on the property in case they are unable to pay back the loan. The Finance Committee reviewed the request and had no concerns, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe we also have some folks from Bicycle Collective online if there are any questions.
Any questions?
Can we make them?
We need a resolution to authorize the modifications to the approved loan
Board Member
terms.
Valdemoros has a
I have
question.
one question.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not understanding, so we loaned them 1.75 and then we loaned a little bit more, $500,000 million more, and now they're taking less, like they want just 1.4 because they got the new market tax credits. Okay, so the loan amount is reduced.
Correct.
Okay. And then when you say that they need to pay it at the end, hold on, the disbursement at closing, that means that in a lump sum,
Correct.
we give them the $1.4 million, here, go build this, and then start paying us back. Okay,
Correct.
that's what they want, that's what they need.
So it's actually a requirement as part of the new markets tax
Okay.
credits. They have to leverage the funds, so they have to have those
They have
funds
to.
available at closing in order to get the $1 million in equity.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for that,
Mr. Chair?
Oh,
Oh, I'm just going to move to approve the resolution.
so I
Second,
got it, okay.
second.
So I have a motion by Board Member Mano and a second by Board Member Valdemoros. Any discussion? All of those, aye?
Aye.
Any noes? Okay, that's 6-0.
I'm an aye. Thanks.
Yes, 6-0. I saw the Councilmember with Councilmember Petro absent. Thank you for that. We're moving ahead now, and Tracy, thank you for staying there. We're moving to item number 4, resolution regarding affordable housing funding priorities for fiscal year 23 and 24. At the table will be Tracy Tran, Lauren Parisi, RDA Senior Project Manager.
Thank you. If we could pull up the presentation. Okay, so this is a continuation from last month's discussion regarding fiscal year 24's annual housing development funding strategy. And so we're here today for your consideration to adopt this upcoming fiscal year's housing funding priorities used to guide how the RDA funds housing projects over the course of the next budget year. We can flip to the first slide. So the RDA's housing funds allocation policy requires that you adopt these priorities on an annual basis as a part of that housing funding strategy. And housing fund projections and specific dollar amounts allocated to housing activities used to carry out the priorities will be brought to you at next month's meeting as a part of the budget discussion. Next slide. Again, the specific fund projections will be brought back to you next month, but as a reminder, there are 4 housing funds that the RDA utilizes, seen here on the screen. Next slide.
So for the board's consideration today, the recommended annual housing priorities for the upcoming fiscal year are similar to last year. So we did review these last month. So these include a wealth building opportunity, affordable family housing, which is described as 3+ bedrooms, deeply affordable housing, which targets 40% AMI and below, and missing middle housing. So the board may wish to consider adopting a resolution to approve these funding priorities for fiscal year 24. And as Lauren stated, these priorities will help guide the activities that will be funded through the budget process. Next slide.
Just, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
On these 4 priorities, just to clarify, they're all pretty much, they're equal priorities. There's not a top or a bottom. They're all the same. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have a 1 through 4 that's all the same.
But some of them do act as threshold requirements, correct?
Yeah, I'll get to that slide. in
Oh,
a
that's
second.
exactly what I wanted. Okay, thank you.
So as discussed in last month's meeting, once we have housing fund projections, we anticipate allocating funds towards kind of these activities on this slide that will help accomplish the goals in the previous slide. The dollar amounts in the housing activities will be brought to the board next month as part of the budget. Next slide. So as part of the Housing Development Loan Program's competitive NOFA for the upcoming fiscal year, similar to last year, we are recommending to require affordable family housing and or deeply affordable housing as a threshold to apply for the funds. And this language is reflected in the resolution in front of you today. So again, last year, I think was the first year where we tried this, where instead of, I think in previous years, we were getting a lot of just AMI levels that were pretty high, and then bedroom counts that were mostly studios in one bedroom. So it was a real big push from the board to, really push the limits on kind of our funds. And so we are recommending to maintain that threshold requirement for our housing development loan program. Next slide. Again, this is just overall summary of our housing funding strategy. And today we're just focused on kind of the yellow portions of those 4 priorities for your consideration. Next slide. So for today, the board may wish to consider the adoption of the resolution to approve the funding priorities for fiscal year 24. And next month, the proposed funding allocations to the housing funds and activities will be brought back to the board with the budget presentation. And the funds and housing activities will be approved as part of the RDA budget in June. We're happy to answer any questions.
No questions?
I have a question, Mr. Chair. I'm interested in the wealth building opportunities priority, and I'm wondering what we might expect in this upcoming budget to see happening on that front. I know it's a loaded question in some ways, but I think, but to me that's really important to figure out like what programs we're creating and implementing, where they sit. I know that's another big loaded question. Is it a priority that's written here? Or do we have some direction as to how we're going to accomplish that this year?
Yeah, so in last month's presentation, we described that priority as a way to encourage things like shared equity programs, homeownership, other different means of achieving kind of wealth building. So there's like co-ops or some other programs like that. So I think through this next year, I think we'll focus on, if we can go back to, I think the 4th slide. This slide, thank you. Oh, the blue slide. So our housing activity would be focused on an equity building model, and I think our idea currently is to have some funds set aside where we would put out maybe a notice of funding availability and have maybe a competitive process and lay out some goals for achieving wealth building opportunities.
Can I jump in real quick? Mm-hmm. And my understanding, and if I'm overstepping or anything, is that part of this comes from the money that we had the perpetual housing fund. Thank you, Allison, for that. The idea was that from hand that was going to maybe join the NOFA team, and so you're still working at what this equity building model looks like. Is that accurate or something along those lines, that this is kind of this new idea of that this is a goal for the city and a goal for the RDA, and so there's still kind of a process being built right now?
So I think that's one component that could fall under this, but I think when we came up with this was more general. We didn't have a specific program or anything in mind. This was kind of carryover from last year where we had the priority as home ownership, and we wanted to broaden that because as we kind of learned through the last year, there are a lot of different ways to like build wealth beyond just like home ownership. So I think the perpetual housing fund could potentially fit under this, but we did not specifically, there's not like a model.
And these funding priorities are for RDA, for the 4 housing funds, and the perpetual housing fund is currently proposed to come from ARPA, which is not bound by these 4 housing priorities, right? But that doesn't mean they're not related. They obviously are. So I guess my question is, if the equity building model is something we really want to see action and progress made on, I don't think it makes sense as a threshold for all projects like we have for the family housing or the deeply affordable, because not every project can just like easily add in one equity shared unit. But could it be something where we say X percentage of these 2 funds needs to be directed towards equity building or something like that? Could we have a different sort of threshold, not threshold sort of requirement put in so that we can ensure that there's some things, because we've been talking about community land trusts and things like that for many years, and the more I learn about these things, the more I think that I really want to move faster on some of them. So I'm wondering what the tool as a board we have in order to ensure some reasonable progress happens on that.
Yeah, so I think that opportunity will come when the budget is in front of the board. So next month we'll actually have some numbers you can actually see, and then I think it'll be up to the board to actually allocate those into these different activities.
Pay attention to the budget and make sure that a good portion of that is for equity building activities.
Yes, and I just to add on the perpetual housing fund, that's actually proposed on the council side in budget amendment number 6, because from an accounting perspective, finance feels strongly about keeping it in the grants fund because it's a grant, and then that way we have our reporting to the federal government tracked. It's my understanding though that the RDA staff will administer the contracts and the proposal, but we're still working through the questions on that proposal. So yes, pay attention to the annual budget, but also in the city budget amendment number 6, because that's where part of it will come.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So I just wanted clarification on the deeply affordable housing and affordable family housing and missing middle housing. And the reason why I ask this is because I want to make sure that we have like mixed income housing versus just only deeply affordable versus only market rate. Like we've talked about this, that there's a part of our community that doesn't qualify for the deeply affordable and doesn't qualify for the market rate. So we also, we as a city, I feel like we need to intervene in those things that the market is not doing on their own, and that's where we spend our money. So I wanted to maybe you can just like the description of each of them. Maybe affordable family housing, does that mean we're giving priority to just people that are building 3 or more units that are 80% or below, or what's that like? What does affordable family housing mean?
Sure, and a specific way we're implementing that is through the competitive NOFA that we release every summer, and the threshold there is that 10% of units are either deeply affordable or family size, so there would still be that mix of affordability levels and sizes, because the threshold is that 10%, because we weren't seeing that when we didn't have that specific requirement. But we're also keeping those priorities in mind as we do like property dispositions, and there we can require again that mix of units, mix of incomes on properties that we develop ourselves.
So is it something that we can do perhaps if we already have used the 10% for deeply affordable houses? So we'll give you priority if if your project has 10% at least deeply affordable. Can we add? And we also give you priority if you do 10% for the 80 to 120 AMI versus, or maybe the 80% AMI versus going full on market rate. 90% of your units are very not affordable, to the common worker, ordinary worker. We cannot afford it. Is that something that we can do there, or?
I think that's kind of built in because the market rate's going to be the ones that are going to pencil in more than the deeply affordable side of the house. So I think it's going to flesh out if the threshold is for deeply affordable at this percentage. You're going to see that mix rate, because we also said it had to be an average, not AMI, across the board, not just a 10 houses here, 20% here, 20% there. It was the average AMI across the whole board had to be a certain rate also, if I remember correctly from last year.
Yeah, usually our requirement is at least 20% of the units have to be at least 60% AMI, and through our housing development loan program, we don't see a lot of like largely market rate. They're majority, if not 100% affordable most of the time.
And that means just 80% or lower.
The last few years they've been lower, down to 60.
Right.
So.
Then that's the point. That's the point. Like the six, we're helping for sure, and we're doing a good job at using our money to help with the deeply affordable housing. But then that's the other portion of the segment of the AMIs that are not people in that segment that we don't talk about cannot find housing in Salt Lake City.
I think,
And that's where I'm concerned about. That we just focus on two groups.
And I think the board selected this, right, with the missing middle and some other, strategies on this, right? And so we are already sort of talking about it. I don't know if the impact hasn't been there yet because we're still working through the process. But in the transmittal from on February 24th, you guys define the impacts done on this specific, on family housing, deeply affordable, missing middle and whatnot. So the impact done, in last fiscal year. And I think this is why we are here, is trying to solve these gaps that the market is not solving by itself, right? And but yeah, I don't know, Board Member Mano.
And I appreciate the question that Board Member Valdemoros asked. I think the missing middle, and whether we're talking about that in terms of building size or an income size,
That's what
I
I wanted
think that term is
clarification
used
on.
for both.
Is it just the house that we're, the structure, or are we talking about the
Yeah,
affordability
at
in
APA, I
rent?
went to like back-to-back sessions where they used the term for both things differently. So I think that term is not necessarily clearly defined, but it can mean both. I think the difficulty is we don't want to say that every project needs to include some missing middle, either in income, because permanent supportive housing is by definition most likely going to be 100% deeply affordable, and we want to have room in our policy to fund those, but maybe like area-wide, we want a better mix of affordability. So one area isn't only permanent supportive housing and one area is not only. I'm just not sure how to put that in our policy. Maybe.
Board Member Fowler.
Thank you. I just feel like I want to point out that if we look at the track record of the projects that have been done by the RDA, there is an actual mix. I mean, we have two projects, one having a ribbon cutting soon with Bryn Shore, but two of their projects coming online that go from the deeply affordable to the market rate, and we're including that. I think that it feels to me that at times we forget what we've done and we forget the conversations that we've had in the past where we've said that these are priorities. And then if we actually look at what is being done, we see that they are. And sometimes we have to change those priorities a little bit. Like home ownership is something that I think is sort of a little bit newer in the last couple of years of these discussions with the board, right? Of like, we really want to focus on home ownership type stuff. And wealth building certainly is something that's just come up within the last year or two. But I think if we actually look at the track record, at least, like I hate pulling this line, but since I've been on the RDA board, is that we're actually following through with all of these type of priorities. Maybe not to the extent that we absolutely want all the time, but I have seen the projects come through, right, where we're, and especially since we have had these discussions over and over again about what we're looking at and that we want, like, not just all affordable on the west side, and we don't want just market rate on the east side, and we really, I feel like, are doing a great job. Well, the staff, not us, because we just talk, doing a great job at saying, okay, we've heard the board say they want this array of things. How can we provide this array of things? And then we keep adding to it. So I feel like, for me, a lot of your concerns are being met already if we just look at the track record of what we've already done.
Sorry. Mr. Chair.
Which Board Member Fowler, you reached your limit of comments, and it's just joking, no, it was a joke to we just talk. You reminded me of what I just asked you, if it was appropriate, which is all this work that this board has done over the years. This is a segue, to something else, but I think it's related to the work that the board has done over the years, and the RDA stuff, and mostly the RDA stuff, because she's right, we mostly talk, can we have a one-pager that is helpful to see what has been done, the impact the RDA has done as far as units, and I know you have this information, but you just consolidate it and freshen it up, bubble it up in our email because there is a lot of questions in social media, or I make the mistake of reading comments out there, and what is Salt Lake City doing, and I know that the work has done by you guys has been incredible. We always need to improve, but it's been incredible, and I think we need to have something to refer to. This is the impact of your money, and this is, Board Member Fowler talks a lot about the money, and it's so powerful to hear those numbers. I would like to see some more information on that. So, Board Member Baldemoros.
Thank you, Chair. You read my mind, and that's what I wanted to respond to Council Member Fowler. It would be for our own good, because I completely agree with you, Amy, that Council Member Fowler, that we have done a lot. I mean, we know this. We know that we lead in the state on how much investment we do in housing. And so I don't have doubts that we do that. Like, it's an obvious thing. We do, but we do what the chair said. We do need maybe that informational sheet so that we know, so that we can plan for the future. And when I say plan for the future, I mean, okay, we can figure out this is what we've done, this is what we've been able to help, and these are the things that probably we need to start thinking about doing in the next few years, because obviously it takes some time. So it's never too early to start thinking about what we can do in the future. And I think that's where I was going with this. Okay, let's figure this out and then start talking today, and then hopefully in 2 years or whenever, hopefully before that, we start implementing. Because we talked about with building, we talked about home ownership, but we're not there yet. We haven't the shovel, it's not shovel ready, if you will. We don't have a project that is shovel ready of some things that we talked about already in a year or two before. So that's what I'm trying to go for. Let's figure out what we've done so far since maybe Amy, started at the council, and then see what else we're going to do in the next 2-3 years. Thank you.
I just wanted to, sorry.
I was going to segue actually into what you're going to say, I think.
So we have in our March memo, attachment B, from the housing discussion, then there's an attachment that shows all of the affordable housing investment the RDA has done since 2011. So I think that provides a good summary, but we're happy to provide more details if you need beyond that.
And actually, I was going to suggest, if board members agree, because I love this summary, I use it all the time. It does have a lot of detail. It does go back 20 years or so. You might want something a little more recent, like something that just focuses on the last, 10 years, 5 years, or whatever you like. But that's up to you guys.
I think I will appreciate that, and I sort of envision this almost like the council, the administration gives us an update almost in every meeting about the specific topics that the council wants to see an update on. That we have that freshen up in our minds, and the public can see every time that we start the board meeting an update on this. It might not happen every meeting, but regularly a little update on the impact that these decisions are making in the community. So thank you. And Allison, I forgot to acknowledge you earlier. I'm so sorry. Any more questions? Yep.
Yeah. Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I move that the board adopt the resolution adopting affordable housing funding priorities for fiscal year 2023 to 24.
I have a motion but I don't have a second. I have a motion by Board Member Dugan and a second by Board Member Fowler. Any discussion? I think it was both of them. Yes, I heard this about Burma Fowler since it's closer, but any discussion on the item? Okay, all of those, aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is Board Member Wharton online? Can hear him. So it's 6 and 1 absent for the positive. We're moving ahead with, thank you so much. Thank you. We're moving ahead on item number 5, resolution, the RDA budget amendment number 3 for fiscal year 2022-2023. At the table, Ben Lucky, Council Member Policy Analyst, Danny Waltz, RDA Director.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is the first briefing for RDA Budget Amendment number 3. The public hearing and follow-up briefing are scheduled for May 9th. The budget amendment has requested changes to 15 project areas and funds. Total revenues are up $6.1 million, which is good news. There are 2 notable revenue decreases. There is a $1.5 million decrease in the central business district, the downtown, and a $1.3 million decrease for the Housing Trust Fund. That's from repayments of existing loans being less than budgeted. The total expenditures are $10.3 million across 46 individual items. A note that all of these figures are preliminary. The county is going to confirm the actual property tax increment, so there'll be an updated transmittal that you'll have with the final confirmed numbers. So they could be more or less than what is included in the transmittal. Most of the 46 individual items are true-up adjustments that are legally required, and they fall into 3 general areas. First are taxing entity payments. These are pass-throughs that go to the RDA and then go to the county or the school district. Those are governed by the interlocal agreements between the RDA and each of the taxing entities. Second is the property tax increment reimbursement agreements. These are between the RDA and individual property owners. The reimbursements are post-performance. So this means that the payments are not made until the conditions are met, such as the county confirming that there has been an increase in the assessed value of the property. And the third is state law requirements setting aside funding in certain project areas for affordable housing. So I'm not going to focus on those legally required items. I just wanted you to know that most of the 46 individual items fall into those 3 buckets. The staff report and the briefing today focuses on the discretionary items that are entirely up to the board. You can decline them, modify them, or approve them. In recent years, the board has preferred limiting duplication of items between this last budget amendment of the year and then the recommended annual budget. And the administration has been working to implement that approach, including in this budget amendment. The city, as you know, is transitioning to a new financial system offered by Workday. So that's going to go live July 1st, coinciding with the new fiscal year. You'll see 5, we're calling them transition holding accounts, that are proposed in this budget amendment. And these holding accounts are for revenue that came in above budget, which is good, putting them in a holding account so as the city's transitioning to the new financial system, those will be held. They won't lapse to fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, and then the administration will come back to consider how to use those transition holding accounts next fiscal year. You may recall in the last annual budget, there was a legislative intent to do a comprehensive review of all RDA accounts. So once the financial system is implemented, all of those RDA accounts, including these transition holding accounts, will come back to you for that comprehensive review. So with that intro, I'll go through the individual discretionary items. And we'll start with the administration budget. Scott, can you put the table up on the screen at the bottom of page 2? That's the one. So every project area transfers a contribution to the administration budget for the RDA. So in the first column, it's the project areas, then the budget, then what the forecasted change is. The variance column tells you how much the change is. So the red amount in the central business district is part of that overall decrease I mentioned earlier. And the column on the right is the percent of the total transfer. And you can see that the central business district, even with the decrease, is still contributing more than half of the funding for the administration budget. The administration budget includes fixed costs, so personnel costs, salary and benefits, but it also includes non-fixed costs such as charges and services, as well as operating expenses. There are increases to charges and services, $288,000, and a $360,000 increase for operating and maintenance. Those increases will double those budgets for the rest of this fiscal year. And there's two policy questions. One is about the overall calculation of the administration budget. There's currently no policy guidance for how much a project area should contribute. Should there be a relationship between how much time staff is working on a particular project area? It probably couldn't be a one-for-one, especially if you have a new project area. It's not going to have enough tax increment to generate that kind of a relationship. One thing you'll note that's not on the table are some of the RDA funds, like Project Income Fund and the Revolving Loan Fund. They're not contributing, but they could. So if you're interested, you could request the administration work on draft policy guidance for how to make these calculations, as well as if there's an unexpected shortfall or if there's excess, more than we expected, how to handle that.
And we've raised this policy question basically at every single RDA annual budget that we've written in the last couple of years. And I think there's just the reality that a lot of the newer project areas have a limit on their administrative costs, even though that's where most of the staff time is spent. Central Business District, because it was agreed upon before taxing entities were focused on administrative cost, has basically been floating the RDA all this time, which is not to say that that's wrong. I have raised recently that as the RDA has been taking on more and more like citywide housing work, there's absolutely nothing in statute that says that the general fund could not contribute towards the staffing costs, the administrative costs of the RDA. And so just throwing that out there as another, in addition to looking at the other RDA accounts that aren't currently contributing towards administration, that's also a legal tool.
Go ahead. Mr. Chair, so when does the Central Business District stop collecting increment?
Scott,
how many more years are left?
Scott, could you go to the table on the last page of the staff report? Page 6. Yeah, Thank you.
2040. Oh, we have a long time.
It was extended from its original expiration date. Yeah.
Okay.
We do have this for reference since the question often comes up. And you'll notice the Depot District and the Granary District are the next ones coming up that have an expiration date when they will no longer collect property tax increment. The Depot District is next year, 2024, and the Granary is the year after, 2025. The one other policy question in the administration budget, there's $200,000 requested for an office remodel and reconfiguration. If you'd like additional details about what that would include, what that would look like, we can get that.
And this is, no. Any other questions? Or
I have a question on the granary. It seems pretty low. What we get, it's pretty low, but has it always been this low or? Okay, and even with all the development that is happening in that area, do we forecast that we'll get a bigger chunk next year? I'm trying to think if we ought to, to extend this one because of all the interest that it's in that area, or if we should, this is the one that we're like,
Yeah, it's always been low because it hasn't seen growth until recently, as we know. The growth that you've seen is probably this will probably be the first year that really truly hits the tax rolls. So I would assume that we will experience a bump for the last 2 years of collection. And then as far as extending that is the main consideration for why that HTRZ is priority number one, because that's somewhat acting as an extension of granary.
And I think this gets to the earlier conversation of if you establish an HTRZ, you might actually end up with more increment to work with than if you were trying to renegotiate a CRA with the taxing entities.
got it, makes sense. So that makes sense because that to me, like if we need to cover your cost, we need to start looking at which districts are contributing to that, and then what's the next biggest one that will collect more, and then invest in that one or reinvest in that one.
The challenge there is HTRZs are capped at 1% for admin costs, and I think we literally just spent that in our last conversation.
Well, there you go. So, to your point, then if they're capped, then I'm not sure if it makes sense to
There
go
will
that
have to be other sources,
Yeah.
yes.
And that might be to Jennifer's point that maybe the general fund might
Right.
help
That's
us.
another-
I
that's
do have
another
a
source.
question about, I guess I might not be understanding correctly, but the budget amendment, the column for the forecast is a forecast, but the assessed values from the county haven't yet are not official for this fiscal year, right? Is that correct?
They've given us preliminary numbers.
Okay, so that's based on those preliminary numbers.
Exactly.
Okay, but so there might be a variance right after that when the final numbers are actually
Right.
assessed.
In previous years, it changes a little bit.
We don't know which direction it changes?
It's been both a little up and a little down.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I was just a little confused about that. What were we using to base that forecast? Thank you. Any other?
If that's it for the admin budget, I'll go through the different project areas and funds next. So we can take down the table. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Ben.
First is the Central Business District. It has the $1.5 million decrease we just discussed. There are indications that might be driven by hotels and shopping centers. The administration is still looking into what is driving that unexpected decrease. The decrease is also reducing a existing property acquisition holding account. So it'll be reduced by $463,000. There would still be $270,000 available, but given how expensive land is in the CBD, there's not much you could do with that amount. So that being said, in future budget openings, you may see requests to add additional funding to that holding account to buy property in the downtown. The board could have a conversation about what kinds of property would be targeted, and that would help inform how much funding would likely be needed to purchase property downtown. Next is Block 70. This is the Eccles Theater and Regent Street. So it's between 100 and 200 South, between Main Street and State Street. There's one change. It's $2,500 to a holding account for the Regent Street parking structure. The RDA has some responsibility to contribute to the maintenance and repairs of that parking structure. We don't have a targeted funding amount, so we don't know how much we need in that account, but we know it's going to be something. This item has appeared every year in budgets, I think going back 4 or 5 years. There's currently $366,000 in that account.
How much again?
$366,000.
And do we know, is there any parking expert that can give the administration an update of what might be needed to maintain that? I don't want us to be hit with a couple $1 million all of a sudden to maintain this structure. Maybe some information regarding that.
Yeah,
would be very.
I'm not sure when the last time there was a structural evaluation. Do you know?
I don't.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
Thanks.
So that takes us to the Depot District. There are 4 items. We've already talked about the administration transfers. The transition holding account is $1.9 million, and this would be a new holding account. There was a tax increment reimbursement agreement that has ended. So instead of funds being needed for the reimbursement, they are now available for discretionary uses. So in the last 2 years of the Depot District, there'll be a little more flexibility than there otherwise would have been. There's also a $25,000 increase for miscellaneous property expenses. So utilities, the cost of natural gas has gone up, maintenance and minor repairs. There's another $25,000 that's going to the revolving loan fund, and this would complete a repayment from the Depot District to the revolving loan fund. It was last fiscal year, there was a one-time transfer from the revolving loan fund to purchase property in the Depot District, and this is the last payment back to make the revolving loan fund whole. The Granary District, it has the transfer to the administration we discussed, and it also has one of the transition holding accounts. It's $294,000. There's a separate existing holding account for property acquisition in the Granary, and that currently has $421,000. North Temple, similar with the administrative transfer, and it has $347,000 going to the transition holding account. In North Temple, you might remember this from recent years, there is a transfer to the general fund from the North Temple Viaduct project area. And this is to compensate the general fund for fronting payments on a bond that was used to build the bridge, the viaduct there. The understanding was the general fund is responsible for and making those bond payments, while the North Temple Viaduct project area would fully reimburse the general fund for those bond payments. Now, there's been a lot of growth in that area. It is now generating more tax increment each year than the cost of making those bond payments, which is great. So 2 of the policy questions are, has the administration evaluated repaying the bond early, if that's an option, and if there would be any benefits to that? The other question is, when is the general fund projected to be made fully whole for those bond payments? And then if you'd like to provide policy guidance on what to do with the tax increment after the general fund has been made whole.
And so the question would be, does it have to go straight into the general fund, or can it go other places?
It could go other places, and the board actually did this in fiscal year 22. The board took $1 million that was above the bond payment and used it, I think it was for the Fair Park, the international market at the Fair Park.
And it was also in the following year, the excess amount was added to the North Temple catalytic project.
That's
account.
right. So the board has used those funds elsewhere.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
I'm trying to remember when we did all of those things. When was it that we transferred from the general fund to pay the bond payments? Was that?
When the bonds were initially sold in, I want to say 2015 or 16.
Oh, it was a long time ago.
And it was before there was it was essentially in the same year as the project area was first established, and there was no development on the land.
So there's no.
And so the city essentially floated those bond payments for the first couple of years, kind of hedging the bet that eventually development would come and repay the general fund, and that has proven out.
And that's development in the entire North Temple project area?
No, there's a special project area just for the North Temple Viaduct.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the area, you'd probably know exactly, it's the area just north of the North Temple Viaduct where all of those new apartments have gone. So
I guess I'm open to either of those. I would like the information that you asked for in terms of like when the general fund is repaid in whole, but I'm not for me specifically, I would be open to not repaying the general fund and keeping that in the North Temple area to benefit the west side and the North Temple project area, rather than going back to the general fund. If there's a valid use, and I think some of the things we talked about, shared equity models and things like that, could be valid uses for that, maybe bolstering up the west side community initiative, whatever the case may be. So I want the information, but I'm open to not repaying the general fund and keeping it in the North Temple project area.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was, in fact, just going to say, I think putting it either into the Northwest or North Temple catalytic project, kind of like we can continue adding to that, and because I don't think we've figured out totally what we're doing with that, but adding more to it to create more money to incentivize in that North Temple catalytic project fund or the Northwest Community Initiative Fund would make the most sense for that. And Mary Beth is up here, so I feel like she's going to tell us we have an obligation or something.
No, you
Okay,
don't. But what I will tell you is this money has never come back to the general fund. We have left it in debt service and used it for the things that both Ben and Jennifer talked about. And then last year, we gave $1 million back to the RDA for housing. So we have never actually moved that money that the general fund paid the debt service on back to the general fund. It has stayed in debt service, and it's done different things as we have gone through the years.
Good to hear. Thank you.
If there's nothing more on this one, we'll go to the Northwest Quadrant project area. There's a proposed $54,000 to be added to the shared costs holding account. There are no specific projects for this holding account at this time. There would be a little over $150,000 in the account. The idea is to have funding available to contribute, and this could be in combination with the general fund, such as CIP, to do improvements that benefit the entire Northwest Quadrant project area. So probably the most straightforward example would be like improving an existing road or a new road that everyone would be able to use in the project area. There might be a possibility, the administration is working on a capital asset plan. This is like a 5-year CIP plan. There could be an opportunity to include this funding in that plan so that it's not just general fund, but you could also look at RDA sources to try and leverage multiple accounts.
Mr. Chair, just
Go ahead.
back on the shared cost. So this 150,000 in there is, it says shared cost. Is that shared cost across all the different areas or just the Northwest Quadrant?
Just the Northwest Quadrant.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's just a Northwest Quadrant shared a fund, not, okay. All right. Thanks.
That takes us to State Street. This also has a transition holding account. It would be $1.3 million. And a reminder, there's a separate property acquisition holding account in State Street that has over $2.1 million. Similar in the 9 line, there is $770,000 for a transition holding account, and there's a separate property acquisition holding account that has $959,000. That's it for the project areas. There's 2 funds that are also included in the budget amendment. There's the primary housing fund. Reminder that state law lets the RDA fund housing at 80% or below citywide, not just in project areas. The primary housing fund, it would have a decrease to an existing holding account for property acquisition. It would be decreased by $635,000, but it would still have a balance of $964,000. The policy question is about how that $964,000 for property acquisition, how that is different or how it relates to a separate holding account for property acquisition, which is just a little more. It's $1 million for affordable housing. They seem similar. I'm not sure if there are intended differences. But if you'd like additional information, we can check with the administration, see if it's an opportunity to combine the two or if there are separate policy goals for the accounts.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, please.
can I ask a huge favor, Ben? Is there any way to just put all of these numbers and where things are going, like in a table? My brain looks at things in that sort of table-esque way, as you know, and I think putting like where it's coming from and how much is going there and the final balance or whatever, these would be really helpful. I'm sorry, I don't want to give you more work, but is that possible to do?
I don't think I'll ever complain about being asked to make a table.
I love you, Ben. Thank you. It would be really helpful.
I could use a dining room.
You have several fans in the audience here.
Can do.
And that policy question, I would like clarity on that policy question.
Okay. The last items, this is actually legally required, but it's new, so we wanted to point it out for the board. There's $375,000 for a school district family and workforce housing account. The agreement between the school district and the RDA limits these funds. It's a portion of their tax increment to family-sized housing, 3 or more bedrooms, and workforce housing. So putting these into a separate account will allow for easier and better tracking going forward.
Is the intent to leverage this alongside other programs? I mean, like, we almost have enough to build one unit.
I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Very much so. I think the school district would appreciate if we leverage it. But as Ben said, the main goal right now is just to track it so we can demonstrate to the school district we're meeting the obligation. Obviously, as you, as a board, have put family housing as a threshold priority for funding, we're probably more than meeting the obligation, and it's just a matter of making sure we're able to demonstrate that.
Thank you.
Sorry, one last question. This is a logistical question, and maybe, Jen, you can help me answer it. As I look at the project timeline, the potential action is May 9th or June 13th, which is during our budget. So some of these things are legal, and this is a budget amendment. Do we need to take action prior to those dates, especially those sort of legal ones that we need, maybe the discretion? I mean, for me, we're putting all of this in a holding account so it doesn't lapse to general fund so that we can deal with it later. It's a piggy bank for a minute. So wouldn't it make sense to act on this sooner than when we're in the
Really in the throes of the budget yet. Technically, you can, and we have adopted budget amendments on the same night as the annual budget, which is funny, but happens. So I think if you could give a sense to Ben or staff of which items feel easy, or if you just want to approve the legally required items on May 9th and then continue discussions into May and June for the other items, I think that's fine. Or we could coordinate discussions with the annual budget if it makes sense.
Mr. Chair and other Mr. Chair, we have in the past had sort of an extra RDA meeting during a council meeting. And I'm just wondering if so that we can act on May 9th, if there would be a way between now and May 9th, even though there's a public hearing and potential action, sometimes we don't act on public hearing nights, but we also have done that in the past. But if we need another briefing, if we could add that to a council meeting just for this, because it makes sense to me to just act, get it over with, and then deal with the budget instead of trying to compartmentalize both having like a budget amendment and what's happening there and then deal with the budget. It kind of, for me personally, so I'm just throwing out the suggestion that if there would be another council date where we could throw this RDA agenda on for if there's like a final briefing and then be able to act on May 9th. Because for me, like just having that table, then I would be able to say, yeah, all of this looks good, or I might have a question here, and maybe we should just do the legal stuff. Right now, I'm like, yes, this all looks good right as is, right?
So we haven't had a chance to review this with RDA staff yet. I was supposed to send you a text yesterday, but we had reviewed with the council chair potentially discussing the RDA budget on May 16th. So like the annual RDA budget on May 16th, because We'll be working furiously to understand the city budget for May 9th. So that'll give our staff the bandwidth to, which is what we've done in the years past, is have the regular RDA meeting on May 9th, which is their regular, time, the second Tuesday of the month. For regular RDA business, I think this would be considered regular RDA business because it's sort of a follow-up discussion, and then have their annual budget discussion on May 16th.
So potentially, we could do everything on May 9th.
Yeah.
Have a second briefing, have a public hearing, have action.
To the extent that you felt comfortable acting, right? Yeah.
I'll just add on to that. There's also nothing in this that I feel concerned about that I need like extra time. The two pieces that I want to continue thinking about are what we do with additional money in the North Temple, whatever viaduct area. I think I'm leaning towards keeping it in that area. And then the other one, which I don't think is actually part of this budget, is that the discussion about having general fund transfer to RDA administration for things that we're asking RDA to do that may be not entirely exactly in the RDA's mandate. I'm open to that discussion as well, but that can be a totally different thing, right? Yeah. But in terms of the whole discussion we've had right now, everything else feels like I'm comfortable with. So I would be okay with a more advanced timeline.
Okay. Is there any other questions, any more?
There's one more item. The board will recall the Housing Trust Fund was transferred to the RDA. This is the first full fiscal year the RDA has had the Housing Trust Fund. As I mentioned earlier, there's a $1.3 million decrease in revenue, less than budgeted, since the repayments were less than expected. So the policy question is if you would like more information from the administration about how many loans are in the portfolio, if there is an aging report, which would help identify how much is due each year to inform what should be put into the budget, or if there's additional tools that are needed. Perhaps there's a software program that does specifically this. I'm seeing yes for some more info. Okay. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, board members? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you so much, Danny. So we're moving now to item number 6, report and announcements from the executive director. I don't see any reports. Thank you. And moving on to item number 7, report and announcement from our RDA staff. Danny Waltz.
Mr. Chair, I have no announcements other than just following up and thanking Ben for his work on the budget amendment, and also recognizing our financial analyst, Erin Cunningham, who is online, and also the work she did with Mike Burns in finance. That Ben did a fantastic job summarizing what has been a lot of work with that budget amendment. So I wanted to make sure I thank them publicly, because that's a ton of work that goes into that. And as much as we try to simplify it every year, I think every year we add layers of complicating line items. So thank you for your patience in that. Appreciate all your help. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Danny Waltz. We have a written briefing, is item D1. We're moving now to the consent agenda, and I need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda. Oh, I should have.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Mano and a second by Board Member Dugan. Any discussion on this item? All those aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any noes? Okay, this passes 7-0. And we don't have a closed session today, so this concludes the RDA board meeting for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, is 4 o'clock okay for everyone? 11 minutes? Okay.